My name is William Woods. I'm past master of San Antonio Lodge No. 1 and a past deputy grand master of the Most Wishful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Texas. I was born June the 1st, 1933 in Glasgow, Missouri. Regular childhood, I grew up in a family of two sisters, one brother, and we had a regular family. Daddy in charge and Mama making all the rules. Daddy's name was Luther Woods, Mama Finell, Miss Finell, Finell. I went to grade school, Evans Grade School in Glasgow, Missouri, and I graduated from Dalton Vocational High School in Dalton, Missouri. I graduated in May of 1951. I entered the Air Force in October 1951. I went into the Air Force because it was best work available at the time for me, for a young high school graduate. That was because in a small town, there's not many jobs available, and those that were available, I did not want to do. I did have no desire to become a farmer. When I first joined the Air Force, I went into food service. I went to school, cook and baker school in Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and I did that for approximately 4 years, after which I became a training instructor, and I did that off and on for about 12 years in one phase or another. I went back into food service in 1968, 1967. Spent a year in Vietnam, December 67 to December 68. Then came back and went back into the training program and stayed until 1969. Got transferred to Richard Gabor Air Force Base in Missouri, became the food service superintendent, stayed there until 1970, 1 year. Came back to Brooks Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas, as food service superintendent, and stayed there until 1962, May the 30th, 1972. When was my retirement day, June the 1st, 1972. I joined Masonry March 1965. So I've been in somewhere around 53, 15 to 17, 52, 53 years. I knew a lot of Masons, and my wife's uncle was a Mason. And he was the one that kept urging me to join. And in 1964, in my family, when they start talking Masonry talk, you done got married, had a job, a wife, and a kid before my daddy thought you was man enough to be a Mason. When I graduated, was advanced to the third degree, I.H. Claiborne was the Grand Master of Texas. I was raised in San Antonio Lodge No. 1. And the whistle master at that time was Leroy Martin. I've traveled extensively since being in Masonry. I don't recall all the places I've been, but every place I've ever been since joining, I would have some Masonic conduct or some Masonic visitation, even in Vietnam. We had a study club established in Vietnam. So have made the pilgrimage to Prince Hall's grave in Massachusetts on an annual pilgrimage, on a 10-year pilgrimage. So all the places I've been, I would probably never been able to recall them all. I was raised in 1965, and I became master of Sanitarian Lodge No. 1 in 1975. When I became whistle master, the senior warden was Norris McVeigh, and the junior warden at the time, I believe, was was Joe Bricks at that time, the junior warden. I served as master approximately 6 years, I think. I think it was probably 6 years. The reason I only served that length of time, number one, my senior warden didn't want to take the job, and I was also serving the first 2 years as potentate of Musa Temple 106. I got involved with Grand Lodge work by attending regional sessions, Grand Lodge sessions, every time there was a Masonic gathering, whether it be holidays, birthdays, or whatever. I was always around. Before I became master of Sanitarian Lodge No. 1, I served as junior warden for Sanitarian Lodge No. 1, and there were times when the senior warden and the master were not able to make certain trips, or representative trips, and I would make those trips for Sanitarian Lodge No. 1. I was appointed to several committees by Grand Master Claiborne, and once that was done, you stayed busy because Grandmaster Claiborne always found a job for you. One of the people instrumental in getting me into the Grand Lodge Circle, or the management circle, was L.A. Foster, a member of Blue Bonnet 192, who was serving as the Grand Senior Deacon at that time. I guess the first Grand Lodge office was when I was appointed district deputy. I guess the rest of the work was committee type work. But I think at one time I was also a special deputy. At least I got charged up with it. Nobody ever told me I was. But I ended up on the staff of District Deputy Robert Brown. And when he stepped down, I became the district deputy. I became district deputy, and at that time, we had several districts that were formed a region. So at the same time, I was also regional director as well as district director. But I became district deputy in 2 years, I think it was, maybe 3, 4 years. I know that it had to be after 1991. I'm trying to say it was 1993 that I became junior warden. 2 years after I became junior warden, I became senior warden. And maybe a year after that, I became deputy Grand Master. At the time I was deputy Grand Master, the Grand Master was Robert Connor. I don't have anyone that was most influential. I have many people that were influential, such as past Master A.R. Jernigan, who was the master of H.M. Turner Lodge 303 here in San Antonio. Mentioned before, past Master Lawrence Foster, who is still living. He's a member of Blue Bonnet Lodge 192. One man that was very influential in my life, though he was a Mason that did not practice, but he was a mortician here in San Antonio, G.J. Sutton. There's a place in town now that is still called Tucker's Cozy Corner, and he was one of my mentors. Brother Lockhart, George Todd. These are some of the older members that have passed on. But those were the people that took me under their arms, if you will. They gave me jobs I didn't want, and then they supervised me on those jobs that I didn't want to start with. Then they encouraged me to do more. So some of the older, elder Masons, and as I mentioned before, past Grand Master I.H. Clavin would find something for me to do every year. And of course, I realized I wouldn't have that job next year because he would fire me sometime during that year for doing whatever it was he asked me to do and not doing it the way he wanted it done. Past Grand Master I.H. Clavin was a man that you always knew where he stood because he was not bashful in telling you where he stood. He liked perfection. And if you didn't get it, he would let you know. But he had Masonry in his heart, and he lived and breathed Masonry. In fact, that's one of the places, one of the things I admired about him, he didn't only know it or have knowledge of the profession, he lived it. But he was a hard taskmaster. But he was always looking for success for the group. And that's what I liked about him. Past Grand Master Connor was he was a good manager, but he had not so good personnel techniques. And by that I mean he had Masonry at heart, he had the Grand Lodge at heart, he worked hard, but no leader can do anything by himself. He has to have followers, and you have to have willing followers. Sometimes as leaders, we can become too commanding, and that slows down our progress. I was district deputy under past Grand Master Cash. One of the easiest people in the world to work for, but still very stern and very exacting, but had a very pleasing personality. I served under him until he was out of office. I first served as district deputy under Grand Master Rout. And then when Grand Master Rout died, Grand Master Cash became Grand Master. I have worked with Grand Master Curtis over the years. I would like to think, and because I'll say it, and if he wants to disagree with it, he might, that I was one of his mentors. I knew him from the time before he served as Tyler, and he has always impressed me as a strong leader. At one time, we had 10 apartment complexes that started under Grand Master Claiborne. By the time I became a Grand Lodge officer involved with the apartment complexes, we had 6. At that time, we had 6. And my job was to work with the management company that took care of the properties. Actually, the only thing we were doing was overseeing the work. We did not handle payroll or anything like that. Payroll is done by the federal government. And the Grand Lodge did not receive any funds from owning the property. What they did do every once in a while, if you had a good management company, you would receive a scholarship donation to the Grand Lodge. But it was primarily an oversight. When I came into office, we probably went through more oversight Grandmaster Cash's administration, simply because we were getting some bad publicity, especially in the Dallas area and for one of our units in Fort Worth. You know, and when I say bad publicity, you know, as you do in most housing units, you got to be careful about who you rent to and how well the rules are followed. So we were getting a lot of police publicity. So we did more oversight, I guess, than Cash did. And Cash, we thought it was because of the management company. So the board decided to get rid of that management company and to hire another one. So with a new management company, we certainly had to be on top of what was going on. And things did shape up quite a bit. Well, I have conducted, I don't know how many funerals. My first funeral that I conducted, I was junior warden in San Antonio Lodge No. 1. Whistle Master Martin was in Ohio seeing about a brother that was gravely ill. Senior Deacon Senior Warden Duriel, Alton Duriel, couldn't get off from work. And I was serving at that time as junior warden. That was a time in San Antonio that if you had not passed the chair, you were told that you could not bury the dead. I called Grandmaster Claiborne and told him the situation. And he informed me, and I try to teach this as I go along. When the whistle master is not present, the senior warden assumes all of his duties. And if neither one of them are present, the junior warden assumes all of the duties. That means burying the dead as well. So I think that every warden should be capable of burying the dead. When I took an oath and got my lecture, I was told on the night that I was raised that there's 3 things that a master has to be able to do. He has to be able to bury the dead, he has to be able to give degrees, and he has to be able to open and close the lodge. And at that time, when you became master, you were told you had 30 days to get proficient. I was told from the beginning, as a master mason, that I needed to learn every station in the lodge. So my first burial was as a junior warden. Grandmaster Claver told me, he said, those other 2 fellas are not there, and you are there, so you bury that brother. And I would think that, especially at the warden, if you ever get to the warden spot, you ought to start getting proficient. You know, that would be the latest. Start getting proficient on opening and closing, degree work, and burying the dead. In San Antonio at that time, we had what was called the San Antonio Masonic Study Club. I attended that study club from the first year I was in Masonry. Eventually became the president for a 2-year period. But I would think that study periods for each lodge is essential if you're going to elevate your membership. Masonry has changed over the years. The purpose of Masonry has not changed. The goal of Masonry has not changed. But Masons have changed. Consequently, the organization has changed somewhat. Some for the better when it comes to progress, doing things modernly. Other principles have become weaker. We still speak of brotherly love, but we don't embrace brotherly love. And so in that respect, I think the organization has become weaker rather than stronger. And I believe that is because those of us who have the Masonic spirit don't teach the Masonic spirit. And some of us try to teach the Masonic spirit, and that's something we just don't have it. So I think our membership has fallen because I don't think we do our core duty as strong as we used to. It is my hope that, and my prayer, that it will regain some of its structure. These 52 years have been, I think, they've been very satisfying. Even though you don't get everything you want, you can't do everything that you want to do, but they have been satisfying even if you're just trying to uplift and upgrade the organization in itself. In order to do that, you got to put time into it. It's not a meet and night situation where you come twice a month or once a month, meet and go home, and that's all it is to it until you come back again. And I think you have found out, being in leadership position, exactly that everybody don't feel the same way you do about the organization. I came into the Royal Arch, and the Knights Templar. In fact, I don't quite know how to put it. Before I became high priest or an eminent commander, I was deputy for York Wright in San Antonio. At that time, we had 2 Royal Arch chapters and 2 Knight Templar commanders. And I became deputy without ever leading any one of them. I was deputy for 2 years. That's because the eminent commander was Frank Boyd, and he traveled all the time, and at that time, Grand Lodge would start out with York Wright. Shrine would meet on Saturday, and we'd go into Grand Lodge on Monday. And I wasn't at the meeting. And they needed a deputy in San Antonio. So Frank Boyd talked to the Grand Eminent Commander, and I became it. For 2 years, though. That was before I ever became high priest. I belonged to the consistory. I became commander-in-chief. Well, I headed up every house in the consistory. And eventually, and I was treasurer for the consistory. And eventually became, after Commander-in-Chief Samuel White, when he retired, I became Commander-in-Chief. I was elevated to the 33rd and last degree of Scottish Rite Freemasonry in 1976 in Washington, D.C. The Sovereign Grand Commander at that time of the Southern jurisdiction was John G. Lewis, a Grand Master of Louisiana, and the Lieutenant Commander was I.H. Claiborne, Grand Master of Texas. I joined Musa Temple, number 106, San Antonio, Texas, 1969. The potentate at that time was Luke Flowers. At the time I joined, Luke Flowers, the past deputy and deputy past potentate and deputy of Rim 2 was Frank Boyd. At that time, Texas had 4 rims, not just the desert of Texas. You had San Antonio, Houston, Wichita Falls, no, it wasn't Wichita Falls, Amarillo, that end, and Dallas, I think it was. And each one of them had one man in charge. We was in the Realm 2, and Frank Boyd. 2 years later, they consolidated all the realms and made it the desert of Texas. And Frank Boyd was the first deputy of the desert of Texas. Frank Boyd was an honorary past imperial commander, and his wife, Lucille Arbois, was a past imperial commandress. I became potentate 1975. Served 2 years. At that time, ever since I've been a member of Musa Temple, the normal term was 2 years. Deputy Oasis, 1980 probably. And I became Deputy of the Desert after Green Davis. Even after being Deputy Grand Master, before I became Deputy of the Desert. I became Deputy of the Desert because Grand Master Connor called me and asked me to take that job because there was some problems going on within the desert at that time, and he wanted me to do it. I never aspired to being Deputy of the Desert, but I was it for about 4 years.